Right. So we have made it. Huh? What did you say? Past Sunday. Uh, we have finally, after all of these weeks, made it to Genesis chapter 2. And it will speed up as we go through these. As you'll see on next week, we'll pretty well look at verses 4 through 25 in Genesis chapter 2. But so far, just to do a brief recap, we've seen the 6 creation days, what God has done on each of those creation days. And last week, specifically, we looked at day 6 and the creation of land animals and the creation of Adam and Eve. We've seen how God created the right number of kinds, and I put that in quotation marks because a kind is not a species, it is a animal that has the right genetic makeup to be able to produce with another animal of the same genetic makeup. So we talked about how cats do not mate with dogs and have crossbreeds of cat dogs and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So a cat is a kind, a dog is a kind, but they can have different variations of dogs and cats and all the rest of it. And God did that, and He did the same thing with us as human beings, that we produce human beings of all different shapes and colors and all the rest. As you see, all the variations in the human genome, but we're all human beings that come from the same 2 human beings, and science confirmed that around the year 2000 when the Human Genome Project mapped our genetic code and they traced it all back and said, you know what? We have a revelation to make. All human beings stem from the same 2 first humans. And we're going, thank you for that information. We didn't know that up until now. But again, science day after day, year after year, confirms what the Bible already says. And so we see that we had that makeup within us to be able to make copies of ourselves. And when we have children, we're not doing any kind of special creating, except we're photocopying ourselves to be able to have kids come from that. So He made man in His image and in His likeness. We looked at that's not necessarily talking about in our physical appearance, but those communicable attributes of God, the reasoning ability, the communication ability that we have. Animals can communicate, but they cannot communicate at the level that we can. And so it's a higher form there, and all of the things that God has done in the human beings, especially when you look at animals can love and they can feel emotion and whatnot, but they do not understand love and those emotions, the depthness of our soul like we can. And so those are the attributes that God made us in His image and in His likeness. And so tonight, that brings us to day 7 of the creation week when God rested. It's 3 verses, but there's a lot of contention in these 3 verses inside of the church and certainly outside of it. Genesis 2, 1 through 3, it says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the 7th day, God had finished the work He had been doing, and on the 7th day, He rested from all His work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done." You would just imagine, by reading those 3 verses, there's not a lot to see here, and just move on, right? Pretty much. I mean, it's like, how in the world could you possibly have any notes on these things here? It's because nothing in Genesis does the world today take as just, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Let's just keep reading and move on here. In verse 1, pretty simple, straightforward. Not a lot of people mess around with this verse. But God's last creative act in creation week was on day 6 when He created Eve. All right. And all creation at that point was complete. You notice on Sunday mornings on the bottom of your notes, I give you a question. I don't ask you, I don't do a test. Some people text me the answers to those questions, but the next week I'll give you the answer to it. And that's just for you to maybe spur you a little bit. If you don't know what the answer is, maybe you'll look it up. If I was to put on a Sunday morning on that question, how many days did it take God to create the heavens and the earth? You should not answer 7. It's 6 days that it took him to create. He rested on the 7th. And so God is not continuously creating right now. If he wants to break that mold, he certainly can, but he doesn't create new things and all. Now the creative act was over. So that's all verse 1 is telling us. Pretty easy. Verse 2. Day 7 seems to be special because it says by the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And verse 3 in a minute will go in and say that he blessed that day. But when we look at this, it says that on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And you got to love the English whenever we read our English translations and what goes in our mind when we read these words. But in order for us to really and truly understand what this is talking about in verse 2, you think, oh, I've got it. I understand exactly what that's saying. I don't know that you even do sitting here tonight. I think when you read that in the English, you have something in your mind like when you get off of work and you've worked a particularly stressful and hard day, you go home and you sit down in your recliner and you rest. That is not at all what this verse is saying. Okay? And you have to understand 2 important words, work and rest. Okay? What do those 2 words in this verse mean? So if you take work, for instance, first, what is that referring to? It's referring to creation specifically. Okay? If you look at the first part of it, I think the verse is pretty clear, all right, but especially on this work thing. But by the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. What was the work he had just been doing? Creating the world. Day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Hanker back. Let's go back for a minute to verse 1. What's that say again, Joe, in verse 1 here? Thus the heavens and the earth were... completed, finished. They had ceased, right? They're completed in all their vast array. There's a period there at the end of end of day 6, right? It's completed. He goes right into verse 2, and he kind of restates that point. On the 7th day, by that time, on the 7th day, God had finished. Just another word for completed, right? All right. He had finished the work he had been doing. So work does not mean every godly act that he does. It doesn't mean healing. It doesn't mean listening to prayers. It doesn't mean being active in your life, does it? He rested from his work, specifically speaking about creation. Okay? That's all that's talking about. But then you say, well, what does it mean now to rest? And he qualifies it again. What's he resting from? All his work. That same work at the end of verse 2 is taking you back to the creation week. That is not at all saying that God on the 7th day sat down, went home, packed a bag, went on vacation, and he is done being active in the world today. It does not mean that at all. Some people read it. It says plainly that he rested from all his work. Yes, it does say that. It doesn't say rest from all of his duties that he does as the sustainer of the entire world. It says he rested from his creative work, which we know he did. He's no longer creating different types of humans and different types of animals and all the rest of it. So again, it's plain when you understand context. But rested there, though, what about that? In the Hebrew, that's the word shavath. Looks like Shabbath, but its B is like a V, which means to cease, desist, or rest. It meant to stop and sit down in ordinary context if you were telling somebody that they had a Shabbat, that means that literally that person would cease what they were doing and they would sit down from doing whatever that was. And the point being that so you didn't, you wasn't up trying to still tinker with stuff and work and all the rest of it, but God rested. He ceased. Again, what did he cease from doing specifically? Creation. Not, again, all of his godly works. Yes?
I had also read when we were Bible with the Greek and the Hebrew and stuff, you had celebration on there too.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of it?
That is a usage of that word in some other context, but I don't think so in here. Mm-hmm. But I know that I think there's a couple of times that it's used like that. And in every word, there's multiple meanings. The primary meaning of this, if you look throughout the Bible, it's used for that cease, that desist, and the resting of it. But I just want you to understand that in this context of what is God resting, what is he doing, I don't ever want people to get in their mind that God, again, went off on vacation and he's not active in your life, because why pray to a God who's gone? Anybody ever seen that movie, Bruce Almighty? Okay, I know some people in church that don't want to admit they haven't seen that awful movie there with Jim Carrey playing God. But Morgan Freeman, I've seen it. Morgan Freeman plays God, and he goes and he basically hands the keys to Jim Carrey's character there, and he goes, "Hey, you think you can do it better than me? I'm going. Where are you going? I'm going on vacation." And he's gone. And some people think that this verse is meaning that about God, that somehow he rested and he's just sitting back on a cloud somewhere. Obviously, he is not. Aren't you glad that he is just not? And everything's spinning. Theistic evolution is a belief that God used evolution. And he basically set the primordial soup and all of the materials up, and then from there, everything just spun and everything just worked from that point. And he's just kind of been sitting back going, "Hey, I'm not in charge of all this," and that's why all of these bad things are happening in the world today. And again, I don't think that's in the Bible, but theistic evolution is not a belief that Christians have. That atheists have. It is a belief that Christians hold, that God used evolution to bring about the world. So again, there are churches filled with people that believe that God is on an everlasting vacation, and that the science has been rolling in this particular way. So anyway, it simply means God ceased from his creative acts that he completed after creation, day 6. That is all. The word rest conveys to us that God was tired and needed rest. Nothing could be further from the truth. Isaiah 40 and verse 28 says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom." Isn't that true? Okay? I can't understand or fathom all the things that God understands, but he's not going to grow tired. He's not going to grow weary. And I give you this big word in the next line over here. Anytime the Bible uses language for God that attributes human emotions or feelings to him, that is called an anthropatheism or something. I can't remember. I Googled how to say it and then I forgot on there. That big word, again, is just saying when you attribute some kind of human emotion or being tired or trying and things like that, and you talk about God in that way, God doesn't try to do anything. He just does it. Okay, he's not tired and restless and everything else. He is using those words to kind of identify with us. So in verse 2, he has ceased his creative works. He's taken a day of rest, which he does not need. So again, you ask yourself, why does he do it? If he doesn't need a day of rest, why does he take a day of rest? Huh? Makes sense to me. We always need to remember that God did not need 6 days to create the world. That's a long time. Yes, ma'am? She said that he set a pattern for our work week. basically is what she's saying. But people think, oh, well, man, he took 6 days. Isn't that a short amount of time that it took? That is an immensely, God was sitting there going, my word, I gotta take a whole week to do this, to have a pattern. He could have on day one, in one spoken word or action, created everything, all the world, all the land. He didn't have to wait to the evening and morning cycles and all of this kind of stuff to do it. He could have just, boom, done it. So again, whenever you're reading inside of the Bible and you had to ask yourself, then why would he write it this way? That's why it had to be 24-hour cycles, people. It had to be 6 ordinary days, because it doesn't make sense why he would do it any other way. He didn't need 1,000 years. He didn't need 1,000,000 years. He didn't need 1,000 seconds. But yet he took the time to do it for a reason. I think Brenda is right on par whenever she's given the reason, but it's just like the rest period. He didn't need a rest period. He chose to have a rest period for a purpose, and that was to be an example to us. Since the creative works are complete, all right, now those laws are in place. And I say this about the science, and I don't want to get into all the details, but science really, they say, well, this couldn't have happened. There's the reason we believe in 13.5 or 0.7 billion years for the universe is because we look in a telescope right now and we see objects 13.7 billion light years away. So they say that the speed of light has always remained constant, and it's never changed. It's not sped up and it's not slowed down. We haven't observed it. We don't observe it speeding up or slowing down now. Thus, the universe ought to be 13.7 billion years. That is a law, just like gravity is a law that only was written after creation day 6. Some of them was written during the time, but there was no gravity before the moon and all the rest of that kind of stuff. Bless you. Good grief. But after creation day 6, it's just like, remember when we looked on day 2 and he stretched out the heavens there? And that is the time to when that speed of light was boom, like that right there. That one time he just stretched out the expanse. And now we're looking at the result of the stretching, and we're telling God it took him 13.7 billion years to stretch it. And he's going, what a buffoon. I did that in one day. I could have done it in a millisecond, but it took 24 hours, to do it. And so I do want to say, though, science is correct. They are right that after God's miracles, and after his special creation that only he could do as an intelligent designer, there are uniform processes that we can observe today, like growth periods and rates of speeds of light and the earth rotating and all of that stuff. Yeah, he's not tinkering with that anymore. He's done with the creative act. But when he was doing it, it was cattywampus. All right, that's a good word. You write it down and look it up. It's an actual word, okay? It was all messed up during that time. But that's why it messes up science today, because they see these things that are changing the laws of gravity, the law of thermodynamics, first and second laws of thermodynamics, and all of this, and they're going, they've always been the same. Yes, they were. For every day except for the first 6 days of our existence, they have been the same. And on day 7, the law of gravity was absolutely in place, but not necessarily on day 3. Anyway, I say again, God is not creating any originals like he did in creation week. However, he does intervene in our lives, and he does break scientific laws and all of that stuff that he wrote. And so it is a scientific fact that you and I age and we die and things happen, and that you're not supposed to be able to have a baby unless you've had sex and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And so God still intervenes, and when he creates a miracle, that is a break of a normal or natural process now that we have. And it is his right to break his own, we call it a law, but his own process if he so wants to. And that's when people come and say, God cannot make a square circle. Well, that's a dumb statement. Yes, he can. And he'd call it whatever name he wanted to call it whenever he created it. It would be some rhombus type of, that's a diamond shape, by the way. But he would call it something else. You say, well, you wouldn't say, look, that's a square circle. He said, no, I called it a geometrogram or something like that. And then you say, well, God cannot lie. No. Because if God walks in here and tells me that this carpet is blue, guess what this carpet is now? It's blue. Because he is truth, and what he says goes. So he couldn't tell me a lie. If he says, Corey, you're 5'2". Sure am. Yes, sir. Okay? Because now I am. Now it's changed everything. We think he's the one that set these standards, and if he so wants to break them or change them and tell us what they are now, he's sovereign. The only thing you say to him is yes, sir. Okay? That's the way that goes. So again, no, God cannot lie and tell something that is an actual untruth, but he can change what we may think to be the truth today. This is an interesting point here. When you look at verse 3, there's something special about this seventh day because God blesses it. He blesses the seventh day, and it says, and he made it holy, all right? That word there is kadash, holy, and it means to set apart, to consecrate, to sanctify that day, all right? And he did bless it. It is a special day, and it is the basis for the Sabbath day that we see in the Mosaic Law. Now, what's an interesting point here, this day of creation, the seventh day of creation, was not a Sabbath day. It was not a Sabbath day. The Hebrew word that is used there is again Shabbath, which is a verb. It's not a noun. It says when we talk about that day and being able to rest and all of this, this day that he made was a day of rest, and that's what he was doing. It did not say this is a Sabbath day. Now, the point that I make here in your notes, there is no command in Genesis to observe this day. There's no record of Adam, Noah, Abraham, or anyone else before Moses doing so either. The Sabbath day, as far as that being a day set apart as the fourth commandment Sabbath, was not instituted until the Mosaic Law was written. Abraham did not follow the dietary laws. Abraham was one of the people where the laws were being written about circumcision and all the rest. How old was Abraham when he got circumcised? Look it up. Not quite, but look it up. He wasn't 8 days old, I can tell you that right now. He was a really, really old, he'd be dead in today's years whenever that happened. You have to understand, again, the laws that we know that the Jews and all followed, Abraham and them was the father of the Hebrews and all of that. Moses came along after Abraham, and that's when God gave the law on Mount Sinai. Prior to Mount Sinai, there were Jews as far as being God's people, and they did not, before that time that we're aware of, have any mandate from the Bible to worship on the Sabbath. So the seventh day is the basis for why God set apart the seventh day. But as the seventh day itself, in creation week, it is not, and was not, the Sabbath itself. So there you go. And you can look at that and study it. The only reason why we have this seventh day again is because God wanted us to have a 6-day work period with a 1-day rest period. All right. It was the basis for our work week. As I've told you before, there is no other time outside of the Bible to where a 7-day week is how we count weeks. There's no scientific reason to have 7 days in a week, but the other major time periods are a day, again, which is roughly 24 hours, is the time it takes the Earth to rotate on its axis, one full 360-degree rotation. That's a 24-hour day. That's why we count 24 hours in a day. A month is the time it takes the moon to make a full orbit around the Earth. That's roughly 27.322 days, if you want to be exact. A year is the time that it takes the Earth to make a full orbit around the sun. So we know why we have 24 hours in a day, roughly 28 to 30 days in a month, and 365 days in a year. But you only get 7 days for a week in the Bible. Go research. Why do we have 7 days in a week? Before Judaism and other pagan, I shouldn't say before Judaism because really no such thing, being that Adam and Eve would have been God's chosen people. But other religions have observed different weeks, some 10-day weeks, some 6-day weeks, some 18 days in different time periods. But across human history, all human beings have typically had 6 working days. They may have had other days thrown in here that were not necessarily working days, and it was sometimes based on the moon and where it was at. But since the law was written by Moses, and they really laid out standards, we have consistently across the world had 7 days in a week. Now, we have a different work week now. Really, our work week is 5 days, Monday through Friday, okay? And they're trying to, in France and England and different, go to 4-day and 3-day work weeks and all. Now just stay at home and don't work at all and get a paycheck. I mean, I don't know what you're going to do. I mean, good grief. But God said 6 work periods, good enough for him. You can work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and rest on the 7th day, or take Saturday if you want to be legalistic with the law. But 6 days. Now, I ask a question and you notice, any idea why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour? I mean, you can know if you read the next bullet point down, but anybody know that off the top of your head without reading my notes?
Yes, the Sumerians.
Did you read the notes or did you just know that?
I knew that.
Good God. What I'm talking about here, star student sits in the front.
Studied the Sumerians.
The Sumerians came up in about 3500 BC with, what did I put in your notes? I can't even remember how to say it. I can't say it wrong because y'all may laugh. Yeah, it's called a sexagesmal system there, so I had to make sure I didn't get y'all off topic here. But that is a numeral system with 60 at its base. So until 3500 BC, the Sumerians came up with that. Really, the Babylonians took that from them. And the Babylonians really instituted that basis of 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, which is how we base all of our other stuff. How many hours in a day? How many days in a week? All of that stuff. That's not a biblical thing. I just wanted to throw that out there to you so that you would understand that all this time that we have does make sense, but it's really based on the lunar and solar heavenly bodies dictate to us the main big things, and then we bust it all down. So we got our year that is set, our month that is set, our day that is set, and we can bust up the other periods however we would like to. But God set out the 7-day work week. The 4th commandment concerning the Sabbath states this in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. You can also, another reference, look at Exodus 31, 15 through 17. It says basically the same thing, but we're going to read Exodus 20, 8 through 11 tonight. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy." And then he's referencing in verse 9 here, back to creation week. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your maidservant, or manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. That, right there, when God gave Moses on Mount Sinai the fourth commandment, was when the seventh day was set apart as a Sabbath day of rest that we were supposed to all observe as far as the law was concerned. You notice, though, when he's doing that, he's using the basis of the seventh day of creation week for that, because he did bless that day. And notice what he says again in verse 11. He says, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Why is he saying that? Because go back to verse 9. He's telling them this is what your work week is supposed to be like. Verse 9 says, 6 days you shall labor, 6 days you shall work and do all of your work, and on the seventh day you should rest. So there he laid out again plainly in the law what your work week is supposed to be like. So these folks, there are so many people that say, wait, these are not literal 24-hour periods that God had here. These are long periods. There's ages and ages in each day. So what do you mean? Do you mean that on the fourth commandment that Moses is telling the people that you ought to work, if a day could be 1,000,000 years in Genesis 1, then what Exodus 20 is telling us is that you work 6 million years and rest for 1,000,000. You tell me. Moses is referring back to his own writings and what God told him to write, and he's using that as a basis for our work week. Why do we believe it's more than 24-hour periods? Now, some people say, well, look, I'm going to refer you to 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. Peter says, in the New Testament, by the way, but do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like a day. I hear people repeat that all the time, and I want to pop them upside the head like Benny Hinn did whenever they repeat that, because you know not what you're talking about when you read it. Does that verse, it is in plain New International Version English, not even King James English, not New King James English. It's in plain English for you. Does that say a day is 1,000 years? What does it say? Oh, no, you didn't read far enough. It says, with the Lord. So this is in reference to how God perceives time, not you. It says, to the Lord, a day is like. Oh, he's just making a parallelism here. It's like 1,000 years, and then stop. Then what does he say after that?
1,000 years is like a day.
So somebody said, if you're 50, you're 50,000 now. Because you said, that's years, so I'd have to do the days. I'd have to do 50 years times 365 days, and then that's how many thousands of years old you are. Because you can't use that verse and say, see right here, each one of the days are 1,000 years, because in 1 Peter chapter 3, 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, it says the day's like 1,000 years. So let's just go back. Let's just be dumb if you want to. Just go back now. Let's go back to Exodus chapter 20. Let's go back. Let's see. Let's just put this in Exodus 20, verse 9 for me. Verse 9. So 6 days you shall labor. So now we're going to work 6,000 years. Bless y'all's heart. Y'all already retired after not even 60 years, some people. You were supposed to work 6,000. And then Cheryl, go back to work. Okay? You didn't work long enough. 6. Again, if you look at 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, that is just talking about God and how he is timeless. Time does not matter to God. To him, a day is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like a day. It doesn't matter. Has nothing to do with creation. Has nothing to do with the day, the word yom in the Hebrew. Has nothing to do with the counting of hours in a day at all as it compares to us. It's just talking about how God is timeless. That's all that verse means, and it should not be used in any other way but that. Then you go on, and some people try to change Genesis by saying that it's not literally 6 days and a seventh day. They go and they say, well, that seventh day is a special day, and God rested. And you know what God did not say in day 7? He didn't say, and there was evening and there was morning on the seventh day. So they said, now that day is continuing to our present time. And they said, we're still in the seventh day of creation. And that is proof that these days can be long periods of time, because the seventh day of creation is still happening now, thousands and thousands of years after that day. And I go, where do you get such an idea? And they go, Hebrews chapter 4, verses 1 through 11. I didn't put that in your notes. I didn't have room. If you go and read that, the author of Hebrews is not at all saying that the day of creation is continuing. He says God's rest is continuing. That is different. And I put it in your notes if you don't think. If someone says on Monday that he rested on Saturday and is still resting, it in no way implies that Saturday lasted until Monday. I'm going on vacation in a couple of weeks, and I may leave work on Thursday. I may start resting on Friday, and you may ask me on Tuesday, well, I rested Saturday, and I'm still resting. And so you go, wait a minute, so you rested Saturday, so that means today is Tuesday, but now it's really Saturday because you're still resting? Nobody, what? Nobody understands you to say that. Just because you continue to rest over multiple days doesn't mean that it's still the same day. But you can still rest, can't you?
People actually think that.
They do. Many people think that. Please, Dr. Hugh Ross, look him up. He's a fabulous Christian man. He's a big proponent of this. Tons of people believe this in the church. In the church.
You go on vacation Monday.
Yes.
You have an everlasting vacation.
That's right, because I say, hey, I had 5 days and it's the same day.
Never goes to Tuesday.
As long as I'm still resting, it didn't go to Tuesday. Yes, ma'am.
Try that.
I will try that when I'm ready to be fired, because they're just going to say not to come back. I'm too stupid to work at a bank if I think like that. But Hebrews is not saying that, but it is saying that God is still in that rest. Absolutely. He is still in the rest of not creating, okay? But the rest that Hebrews is talking about, if you read verses 1 through 11, that's talking about the kingdom of God. It's talking about us entering into that rest with God. That is meaning not our rest from creating. That is meaning our rest in our peaceful eternity that we're going to have with God. And we all have a hope of entering into that rest with Him. And that's what Hebrews is talking about. So again, that's taking that verse out of context to try to change Genesis to fit what you think it should be in the world today, to fit in evolution and naturalism and all the rest of it. So the fact of the matter is, as I say here in your notes, that God took 6 literal days to create the world so we'd have the basis of a work week. In His infinite wisdom, He modeled a day of rest for us so that we could cease from working and devote that time to Him. Everything that you read, from the context to the literary construction, how it's worded, how the sentences are put out of Genesis up until this passage, suggests that there were literal 24-hour days, and to suggest otherwise is to take away or add to the text. That's pretty much, I read those lines that I wrote there so that you would understand how definitive I am and how dogmatic, which means I'm planting my foot down about this, that it is a literal 6 days that God took. And again, I think that he was slow in doing it then that way, and he did it to show us something. And again, there are so many people that do not believe that. And I want y'all to understand how important this stuff is, because your children, your grandchildren, any of those kids, if you have kids that are going in through school or will be going through the public school system, they're going to be taught absolutely 100% different than this. And I just ask you, if they cannot really understand and really agree with the first one page. If you take a Bible that's not a study Bible, then Genesis chapter 1 and 2 are probably on the first page of that Bible. And if the first page isn't right, and they can't stand on that, why are they going to stand on another testament that was written thousands of years later? You've got to instruct them in what did I read on Sunday? Our mandate in Matthew 28, verse 19, is and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded unto you. That means from Genesis 1:1 to Revelations chapter 22, 21, amen, at the end of that, all right? This whole thing, I know sometimes I'm talking about this and y'all are sitting back going, why does he got to teach me that? I believe all this stuff. I understand that you may. But have a conversation next month on Thanksgiving around your table and ask your family, do they believe that the earth is 6,000 years old or 65 or 4.5 billion years old? Ask them if they believe in the literal 24-hour days of creation. Ask them if they believe that dinosaurs died 65 million years before human beings came on the scene, that there could be sin before death. Ask them. I dare you. You will be shocked at the answers that you get. You'll be shocked at the blank faces to think, I never thought about anything other than that. Because they have gone to church in the world, at school. That's their church. That's who's teaching them. And absolutely nobody else is presenting anything else that is different to them. So again, that's what they believe, lock, stock, and barrel. And I'm just telling you that those kind of beliefs undermine the Scripture from the very beginning. And we wonder why our foundations are eroded. We wonder why we can't get onto the New Testament belief of justification through faith through Jesus Christ, because they don't believe in the entire Old Testament. We're in Jim's Bible study on Monday nights, and we're talking about, and I've had people in this church, not people necessarily now that go to this church, but they happen to be here for some reason. I know the reason, but be here, and they're Christian people. And one person in particular stopped me in the foyer, and we had a conversation. And this individual told me in no uncertain terms that particular person did not believe in the Old Testament, the 39 books of the Old Testament. They believed they were just stories, just history, but it was not literal in any way for what God had done. Now, I'm just asking you, this person is well into their late 50s or 60s, on staff at a church somewhere. Nobody would know what I'm talking. I'm trying to be sure that I don't tell who this person is. And I had the opportunity to say, pump the brakes. We've been talking for an hour, but it's going to be an hour and 30 because we got to discuss this. If you throw away the 39 books of the Old Testament, you have no way of understanding the next 27. No way. No way to understand that. And there is Christian after Christian, so I say this, Christian after Christian that is out there that never reads. There may be people in here that haven't read or studied the Old Testament. I'm telling you, I'm going to make a statement real quick. Oh, I hate to end like this, but I am. If you have only read and appreciated and studied the New Testament, then at best, you're a shallow Christian. At best, you're shallow. Because you can't even understand what the New Testament means by sexual immorality, unless you read the Old Testament when it lists the 40 different ways that you can defile yourself with sex, for instance. The New Testament, when they were writing it, assumed that you read and understood the references that they were making in there about all of this kind of stuff. When Jesus was on the cross and he's quoting Psalm, he assumed that the people that he was there and the other people that would read it would know what he's talking about when he references that. I promise you, you read and study the Old Testament, when you read the New Testament, then you go, oh, look at that, oh, look at there. That's what John the Baptist meant when he said that. That's what they meant when they said, look, they're referencing the scripture. I know, I read that somewhere. And you'll get deeper and deeper and deeper in your walk with God. I implore you, bring your children to church. Get them involved in Awana. If you can on Wednesday night, talk to your kids, and let's change the trajectory that the secular world is doing to our young people. If we don't do that, y'all, the church is dead in a couple of more decades. I can promise you that. Let's pray.